day after Labor Day. But in order to commemorate Labor Day as of yesterday, what could be better than to have with us a guest we're truly honored to have, Aaron with the Freedom Foundation. He is the CEO, and this is a fantastic organization. He's going to tell us a lot about it, about his book, and about the labor union movement in the country and what they're doing to save our country. Aaron, welcome to the show.
Kevin, thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure.
So, where do we start? Because I actually started reading the intro of your book, and between that and attending the Freedom Foundation dinner in Oregon last year in 2022, I learned so much about you, actually, and I was fascinated because I didn't know some of that. I knew you had played basketball, and that you had come from England, but there's a lot in there that really tells the story of why the Freedom Foundation. So why don't we start out first by talking about the Freedom Foundation, then let's fill in how your biography brought you to where you are.
Sure. So the Freedom Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit, which means that we're non-political. We call ourselves an action tank, and what we do is we fight government unions. Government unions are the number one contributors to radical leftist politicians in America. But the scandal of that is that they're taking this money from teachers and state workers and county workers and city employees and all the rest of it, and they're funneling it into liberal politicians' campaign coffers. This doesn't represent the best interests of the people that they're taking the money from. It represents the union boss's best interest. So what the Freedom Foundation exists to do is put the power back in the hand of people and out of the hands of a few radical union bosses.
It's kind of a collectivist organization, isn't it? And when it's government unions, it's particularly insidious. I remember hearing long ago that even FDR, when he was president, kind of warned against this. Like, this is electing the people that you're going to negotiate with, and the person left holding the bag are going to be the taxpayers. And then, of course, as you just pointed out, a lot of the time, in so many cases, people that are members of these unions don't necessarily get a lot of help from the union for things that relate to what was supposed to be the original purpose, but also they end up paying for politics that they oppose.
Yeah, so let's put that in practical terms. Brandon Johnson is the new mayor of Chicago, and he had over 95% of his campaign funds, of his campaign coffers, came from government unions. We're talking about around $10 million. And so now he's going to go into office as the mayor of Chicago. He's not going to serve the people. He's going to be sat across the table from the union masters that put him into office, and he's now meant to negotiate a contract that represents the taxpayer. That's not going to happen. He's going to inflate wages far past the rates that should be offered. He's going to offer benefits that are unaffordable to the taxpayer. And inevitably, it's going to end up costing the taxpayer millions, to a point where the city of Chicago is inevitably going to end up bankrupt at some point. But that's what the unions are investing in, is these politicians that will ultimately bankrupt cities, bankrupt states, and the way that they're going could bankrupt our country. So what we need to do is we need to have a system where these public employees can create local associations if they wish to, but they shouldn't be associated with these big national union conglomerates. We did a report a year or so ago where we analyzed the National Education Association spending, and they spent 7.5% of their budget on representational activities. And over 50% of it on gifts to nonprofits, political gifts, and lobbying. Their number one goal is a political organization. It is not to represent teachers.
Is that, now we had a question on our show last night from somebody who, when we were mentioning that you'd be on tonight, they said, what percentage of the dues that people pay end up funding political activity? And would it be that 50% potentially?
Yeah, for most of the national unions, yeah, it's over 50% of their budget is either going to gifts to nonprofits, political gifts, or lobbying expenses. But that's their priorities. Their priorities aren't to represent the members. They have no need for that. They exist to now, and look at the teachers unions the past 2 or 3 years. You look at shutting down schools, masking our kids, critical race theory, sex ed. We uncovered that one of the teachers unions, the National Education Association, again, in 2018, they held their annual conference. We got some internal documents from the conference. Their top 3 agenda items in that conference: CRT, sex ed, and defund the police. In 2021, these have become mainstream issues. So they're not just the number one funder of the radical left, but they're actually also the policymakers of the left.
Yeah, they're actually pulling the strings, right? And it's not the members that are paying these dues that are actually deciding all this. It's kind of like, it's almost like a giant corporation that's unaccountable to customers, which sounds like the worst of both worlds, actually.
Yeah, and you brought up a really good point, is they don't represent the best interests of these public employees. You go and speak to a teacher or a state worker, everybody knows some public employee that's listening to this podcast. They're not some radical leftists. I mean, maybe 1 or 2% are, but they're just normal people. They don't want their money going to Joe Biden's campaign. They don't want their money going to Brandon Johnson, the mayor of Chicago. They want to spend their money on gas and groceries and Christmas presents or a vacation or whatever it may be. But the problem that we are finding is that most public employees have no idea that these dues are optional, which comes back to your point. They're unaccountable. They're unaccountable until you tell their members they can leave.
Interesting. Yeah, and they actually create this, Rube Goldberg scheme of making it hard for you to even know that you can leave. And then when you can leave, they throw paperwork at you. You guys have spent time, haven't you, trying to arbitrate the process that they put in the way of workers. And you've had to go to court, right, to address some of these.
Yeah, so in the state of Oregon, for example, as you know, Kevin, I lived in Oregon for a long time. And we have a really great operation led by Jason Dudash, our Oregon director there. And what we found there is that the government, the legislature, got in bed with the unions to make rules and laws that make it harder for workers to leave their unions and make it easier for them to sign up new members. And now the state is even limited to what they can talk about with public employees. They can't, for example, tell them this is optional. So that's why the Freedom Foundation's campaign is so important, because you have to tell every single one of these public employees that they can opt out of their unions and stop paying these union dues. And yeah, you're right. When the unions or the state doesn't allow them to do that, you bet you we sue them. I've got 10 attorneys on staff, 5 paralegals. We have 70-something lawsuits against unions today. And all they do is wake up each morning and think, how can I sue the unions today?
Which is great, because lying in order to get money from people is fraud. And that has consequences. And of course, you actually have to fight through a legal system that sometimes isn't always to your advantage or your favor. But that's one of the reasons why folks should actually donate to the Freedom Foundation, is they sustain these efforts. They make it possible for everyone else to actually operate with the truth and with freedom. Now, I just posted the link to Freedom Foundation is not your average think tank. And I like what you said. It's an action tank, because a lot of people are like, all they do is talk. They publish white papers and they tell you how bad it is. The sky is falling. Look, the sky is falling. You guys are out there knocking doors. And that's how you got started, right?
Yeah, so I started as a canvasser in Washington State and quickly moved into Oregon in 2015. And yeah, I was the guy I was going door to door telling people that they could leave their unions. And I was really proud of the work that we did. In Oregon, we helped over 50% of SEIU's in-home care providers to opt out of their unions. At the time, teachers and other public employees could not opt out of their unions and stop paying union dues, but home care providers could. So yeah, I went door to door and told them to stop paying union dues. And they did, overwhelmingly, because when they figured out that this was optional and they figured out what the union was doing with their money, they didn't want to pay it anymore. So yeah, we have a really great operation in Oregon that's effective. There's just over 120,000 union members in the state of Oregon. And Jason and his team, they go door to door. They send them mail. They send them emails. They do digital marketing, just about any way that you can think of to contact these public employees. Him and his team are doing it every day.
So that's interesting what you said about Oregon. We kind of feel out here in Oregon that the state has been largely run by the public employee unions, that we're one of those states that has a dangerous and very large liability for public pensions that tend to eat at least a quarter, I think, of every dollar that we think is going to something like a classroom to educate students, and instead it goes to something else, which has been negotiated between the people that the unions elected, which happen to be largely Democrats, but we know that that's where most are done it, and the unions themselves. And then when you look at the people that are staffing the governor's office, for example, they're pretty much people that are handpicked by the unions to go work for that, to almost watchdog and make sure that politician stays the course. And then I think the Senate president, in fact, worked as a lobbyist, I believe, for the public employee union. So the people running the state of Oregon largely owe their existence and their power to the public employee unions, and it's a mess here.
Yeah, you don't get elected into any major seat in the state of Oregon as a Democrat without the seal of approval of the government unions. I'll give you a good example. I'll actually give you some hope here. When we started our campaign there in 2015, government unions were spending collectively, I think, $15 or $16 million, something like that, to elect liberal candidates, liberal politicians. As we've been operating our campaign to tell all these people to leave, union revenues have gone down. And not only at that time were they spending money locally, they were actually sending money from Oregon to other states to go and elect liberals as well.
Wow.
So what we've now seen is that unions' revenues have gone down so much in the state of Oregon that they firstly stopped sending money to the national unions, which is good news. It means that Oregonians aren't paying for Georgia Senate runoff races, for example.
Yeah.
But what we've also started to see is the political spending locally has decreased over 70% during that time frame. And the best articulation of this is during the governor's race last election cycle when Kotek was campaigning. SEIU did a victory lap because they gave her a check for $1 million. It was like, we're making a significant investment in Oregon's future. What Melissa Unger, who's the president of the local SEIU in Oregon, didn't say was that this check didn't come from SEIU 503, which is the local. They couldn't afford to do that. So they got money from out-of-state unions from the SEIU national to come into the state of Oregon. So even though it's not good news that SEIU is still spending all this money in the state of Oregon, it's good news that locally their spending has been limited by the membership drops. So now what I tell people is that we need to continue hitting these guys in Oregon, but we also have to hit them in California, in Washington State, in Illinois, in New York, and New Jersey, all these other big liberal states with high union membership. We have to replicate what we've done in Oregon everywhere.
So I seem to remember from the dinner last year that there was a significant, was it 40% reduction in the money that they were taking in at the in the state of Oregon, public employee unions?
Yeah, so the public employee unions differ. The highest is amongst state employees, and over a third of the state employees in Oregon no longer pay union dues to the SEIU. It's something like 20% of teachers now no longer pay union dues to the teachers union. So we're starting to see these massive declines. In fact, it's some of the biggest declines in America proportionally over the last 5 years has happened in Oregon because of the campaign that we've been running there.
Wow. To think that Oregon could actually give hope to the rest of the country that they could actually confront this and defeat it. By the way, so I got your book yesterday. And so Aaron has a book. It's called Freedom is the Foundation, which I love that kind of play on the words Freedom Foundation, because you explain it in this book. Let me go ahead and I can display that here. that's the book. And of course, you got Mike Huckabee there providing a quote on the cover. Also, I know if I go within the book a little bit, there's quotes from Nigel Farage, who is the guy who really helped trigger Brexit. And this is a good lead in to what the book is about. But also, I was pretty impressed with learning more about you from this, because everybody kind of goes through this process of where they didn't maybe pay much attention to politics, and then they somehow they come across an opportunity where it becomes important. And I can only imagine how proud Nigel is of you, because of course he's fought a very tough fight. They've been trying to debank him actually in the UK, and we've talked about that on our show a number of times. But in the introduction, you talked about your experiences growing up and why this just kind of came together. You came to the United States to play basketball, and then but you came from a city, Birmingham, that was, as you said, where industry died, but also a land of socialism. And you talk about what that meant and how that really informed your experiences when you came to the United States. And then somehow, by chance, your best friend at Corbin University, where you came to play basketball, turned out to be Tom McCabe's son. You said the Lord is actually got a plan for you. You figured that out. What better evidence could there be than that?
I know. I look at my whole life, and it's just it's a series of events that God designed to put me exactly where I am today. I came over from Birmingham, England, I grew up pretty much in poverty in the UK, and made my way over here on a basketball scholarship. Being able to be half decent at basketball was my saving grace. Certainly nothing to write a book about, but it got me over here. But I realized pretty quickly that America was the land of opportunity. And then I figured out why. It was because of capitalism. It was because of the conservative values that I hold. And then I saw the left and government unions starting to attack those very foundations and start to want to turn America into England. And I basically just decided at that time that I wasn't going to stand for that, and that I was going to fight. And the way that you fight is you remove the influence of government unions from politics. Like I said, you put the power back in the hands of people and out of the hands of a few radical union bosses. So yeah, ironically, at that time, I was roomed with my still best friend, Joey McCabe, and his dad is Tom McCabe, and Tom is my predecessor, the former CEO of the Freedom Foundation. So he brought me on as an intern in 2015, like I said, going door to door. And then 6 years later, I through various promotions, etc., was named the CEO. So I tell people, yeah, it's a nonprofit, but I'm living my version of the American dream. But I'm not gonna just roll over and let this country turn over into England. I'm gonna fight, and the way that you do that is by fighting these unions.
Yeah, I think the way you explained it is as much as people can be down about how the liberal politics of different states, particularly blue states like Oregon, you found it to still, relative to where you had come from, to be the land of freedom and opportunity. Like you could see something, and this often happens with somebody who emigrates to the United States. They can see what's great about the country more so than the people who were born here, maybe blind to it. And then you also talked about how there's time to save it. There are people who understand this, that will work hard to do it, that they're not going to. And you rose in kind of a meritocracy in this fight to save the country. And you spell it out in the conclusion. It's no less than a battle for the survival of the country as we know it. And I thought it was interesting how you compared a very typical example that we talk about now, which is we talk about the student loans, right? And how they're going to and we've heard Bernie Sanders first promoted this idea, which was a wacky socialist idea. Then Joe Biden's talking about it, and their polling says maybe they can go ahead and get some younger folks to vote for them if they just give them a bunch of free money by canceling their debt. And I thought it was very interesting the example you gave here. It's like this is what socialism does to kill incentive and to essentially leave you kind of dead and unmotivated,
Yeah.
which is that um, they would give people loans for school, and then they would say you wouldn't have to pay them back if you earned more than X amount of money. So no one wants to get a lucrative job because they don't have to pay back the loans.
Yeah,
Insane.
it's the tip of the iceberg in England, honestly. I mean, I still have most of my family still lives over there, and I still speak to them. I go over there occasionally. They come over here, and sometimes we talk about this stuff. But yeah, when you look at the tax schemes, first of all, so you have to pay a tax to own a television in the UK, just like you would renewing your car tabs or whatever in America. You have to do that to own a television over there. You have a flat 17.5% sales tax. You just go through the list of taxes that these people have. On top of that, the benefits that you get back are a national health system. You get this student loan system, which I briefly thought about going to university in the UK. Thank God I didn't. But yeah, that was one of the things that I spoke about with my school counselor at the time when we're looking at career options was, well, yeah, you can go to university. I'm like, well, I don't really want to get tens of thousands of pounds in debt to then, have to pay that back for what? What's the benefit to me? And I remember her telling me, well, you only have to pay that back if you earn over, I think it was £30,000 at the time. I'm sure it's maybe more now. So as long as you stay below that, then you won't ever have to pay it back. And I just remember thinking that, this government school, there's this government scheme out there that basically exists to keep people in poverty. And it's completely ridiculous. Like I said, it's the tip of the iceberg, but yeah, these are the things that they want to bring over to the US, and we must prevent that from happening.
Yeah, and you've seen what it's done to the UK. I mean, you did talk in I forget in one of the chapters when I was going through and trying to get a sense of the different chapters in the book. You did mention that there was a revival thanks to Margaret Thatcher, because in the 60s and 70s that was the path that Britain was on, and you were concerned that's the path that the United States might be heading down if we don't take action. But at the same time, I mean, she did help, but it's really hard to get out of socialism, right? What you mean?
Yeah, not just that. Thatcher did amazing things for the UK, but the way I describe it in terms of the UK's timeline is it was going down, 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 and then we had 11 years, I think, of Margaret Thatcher, where she started to bring it back up, but it just went straight down to hell right afterwards, and it's continuing right down that route as well. So, yeah, same in America. I mean, I don't think anybody can look at the direction of the country today and say it's a positive one. So yeah, we need to get wins on the way, and we need to turn the country back around. And again, I believe that the way that you do that is you remove the funding mechanism of the biggest contributors and the biggest policymakers of the radical left, government unions. Let me put it a different way. I don't see a path to prosperity that doesn't involve removing their influence from politics.
Yeah. Yep, and you addressed that in the conclusion, and one of the things I really liked also that you put into the conclusion was you had this quote that we've all heard, and it's important to remember these statements, but it's been said to us before. It's the quote from President Ronald Reagan where he said, "Freedom is never more than one generation away from becoming extinct. We didn't pass it to our children in our bloodstream. Must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same. Or one day we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it was like in the United States where men were free." And I've heard that many times. I heard it the first time I think he gave that in a speech, but it resonates, and it's interesting because it resonates through you, which I don't think you probably have any memory of Ronald Reagan to speak of, but we're talking about this here today because you're doing what he said.
I appreciate that, Kevin, and I definitely aspire to make people like President Reagan's legacy, proud and continue that on. But yeah, what he said was right. And the part to expand on what I think he was saying of being fought for and protected. I mean, you can of course look at Reagan's presidency and think about how he and the United States were literally fighting for it.
Yeah.
During that time. But I think he also meant domestically. I mean, he went through it with the unions as well. I mean, he got into a massive dispute with the air traffic controllers union during his presidency, and he didn't back down there. And one of his other quotes that I'm going to completely butcher is communism does exist today in America in government unions. And then the other example he used was HOAs, which is absolutely correct as well.
Yeah, everybody detests HOAs, that's for sure.
But yeah, the point is you got to fight, and the best way that I think that we can do that is by fighting these government unions, because these people are nasty. You look at Randy Weingarten and the American Federation of Teachers. What they did to our schools was completely despicable during COVID. Not just their education, but their mental health, and they did it all while trying to pursue a political agenda that benefited them. It's completely wrong.
Yeah, and we also had a president and a department, CDC and Department of Human Services that colluded with the public and then lied about it until we actually, I forget which organization uncovered it, but got the actual correspondence, the letters that were sent back and forth. So that's how powerful they are. They actually have control of our children. And so that's why this is, as you put it, I think kind of a life and death struggle for the country. If we're serious about this, if we're serious about making sure that future generations, and you put this in a very personal context. That's what I really liked about the way you kind of put parentheses on your book with the introduction and the conclusion, is you talked personally about, you started a family. You talked about how you went to your swearing in to become a U.S. citizen. And congratulations. I didn't know when it happened, but it sounded like you showed up that day. And instead of having one of these events with fanfare, it's like, thanks to COVID, it's like, okay, you passed the test. Now it's time for swearing in. Boom. And you're like in the next room with a dozen people getting sworn in the place that, interestingly enough, because that was 2021, right? It's the same place that was attacked and vandalized by Antifa and all the riots and mayhem of 2020. And it's surrounded by homeless encampments. So it's like one place you're actually getting this glorious moment and becoming an American, but you're also surrounded by the evidence that there's a lot of work to do.
Yeah. It was, that whole experience was, it still makes me emotional just thinking about it. But yeah, I mean, I showed up at I maybe put in the application in 2019 or 20 or something like that. Big document, lots of work that went into it. And yeah, in 2021, they got back to me and said, you've got an interview appointment where you have to do the test. You've got to, do an interview, and they basically decide that day whether you're going to be let in or not as a citizen. I was a green card holder at the time, and yeah, I go into the test, and one of the questions was what was being fought against in the Cold War, and of course the answer was communism. And I remember thinking that Biden hasn't gotten his hands on this test yet, because there's no way this question would stand if he had. And then it was during COVID, so. The place was empty. I've been to this place probably half a dozen times, and usually it's slammed. Usually you sat in the waiting room for hours, and there's a million people going around. This time it was empty. There was like 12 people there. So I was one of the first names called, and did the interview, and she said, well, you're ready to, you've been accepted. Do you want to do your swearing in later today? And before COVID, they used to make a big ceremony out of it. I mean, you used to have people come in. It used to be a big deal. But yeah, they just did it. Me and the 10 of the 12 of the people or so were sworn in that day. I remember thinking that I'm being sworn into the freest country in the world, yet we're literally being muzzled by these masks.
Yep.
Biden and his cronies are making us wear.
Yeah, it sounds like there's some ironies to the whole experience, and yet, you were proud to become an American and to, I think maybe, like I said, fight for it in a way that you understand better than many people that were born into it. And you said at the end of the conclusion here, you said that uh, there's no doubt that this dire state of things in progressive states exists, but um, they don't compare to England and other countries that are mired in a socialist quicksand. And it is a quicksand. I lived for 9 years in the Netherlands, and I got to see it too, in a way that most Americans never get to. And we aren't close to that yet, is what you said, but you're bullish on America. And actually, that is such a quintessential thing. I found that wherever I went, the optimists were still the Americans. Like, I think we can do this.
Yeah. Yeah, throughout history, America has been, we've always overcome uphill battles and struggles. And of course, been mistakes along the way. But yeah, I'm bullish on the future of America. I think that I think that the union's best days are over. And I think that the next generation gets such a bad rap. But honestly, the young people that I speak to, I'm encouraged by them. They don't recognize they don't recognize the conservative values in the traditional sense that we do. I mean, you look at polling, they're pro-abortion just naturally. They believe in this environmentalist climate change stuff. They buy into all of that, but you break down concepts for them and they get it. You talk to them about taxation and they get it. You talk to them about the COVID policies in particular. They saw that as overreach from the government. So they're never going to be the single issue voters that traditional conservatives tend to be. But I'm bullish that they see things in a way that we don't give them credit for. And I think that that's going to play out over time as well. But yeah, I think the more that we can continue to dwindle union membership in America and put the power back in the hands of people, the better off we're going to be. You look at the last presidential election, for example, and where the union spent their money, those states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, those kinds of states, if you can get the money out of those states from the unions, you can start to see elections turn in a different direction.
That is very well said. Actually, one of the things that occurred that gave me hope for younger folks being able to see through sort of the lie of socialism was the battle over in Portland over whether they were going to be allowed to have Uber. Do you remember when that first happened? And it was clear that what younger people wanted was they wanted the freedom to decide for themselves how they were going to get around. And they also wanted the freedom to go and work for a company that allowed them to make money whenever they had time doing that job. And it won. In that case, freedom won. And I think that's fundamentally what they want. That's what humans want once they recognize it, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they want to be they want to have prosperity, and yeah, in some ways they want to rebel against their parents or whatever. But yeah, mostly I think that they want freedom. They want prosperity. Maybe they're more libertarian in their thinking. But yeah, anyway, I'm bullish. I'm bullish on the future of America. And you work at the Freedom Foundation. I've got 60-something employees here now. And you just go around our offices and speak with these people. I mean, they're mostly younger people, full of optimism. And you're amazed to hear their stories about how they ended up at the Freedom Foundation. I mean, I'm just one of 60-something stories. But you go through our staff, and it's really encouraging to speak to those people.
So one other thing about your book, so the chapters, you kind of walk through how you went door to door for freedom, and that really actually changed you and made you kind of a strong advocate for something because you had that experience, right? You talk about the influences: Calvin Coolidge, Ronald Reagan, Scott Walker, Wisconsin, we just talked about. And then you note in chapter 3, the beginning of the end, Janus versus AFSCME. And it's funny because we've had on our show some months ago, Rebecca Friedrichs, who tells sort of the prequel story to that, where she was one of 10 teachers in California that took on the California Teachers Association. That case failed because of the death of Antonin Scalia, whose vote no longer counted, which would have ruled in their favor. However, it did lay the groundwork for this beginning of the end. So why don't you kind of summarize a little bit about what people will learn by reading through and taking in these different chapters and stories that you share?
Yeah, so one of the reasons I wrote the book was because a friend of mine, a donor, basically said, Aaron, you have to document this fight because no one else is going to do it. No one else is going to put it in a way that everyday people will understand. For one, I'm not a policy nerd. I you can see I speak in 30,000 foot terms and not in the weeds. So yeah, he said, you have to document it and you have to show it to people because they have no idea of this fight. So that's really the reason that I wrote it. But yeah, I document some of the fights, and one of them is Janus v. AFSCME. And what Janus did is Janus made it so it was in 2018. So public employees weren't forced to pay union dues before. Prior to 2018, you could opt out of your union in what we call non-right to work states, but you had to pay union dues. So Oregon was, of course, one of those states. So when the US Supreme Court decided Janus v. AFSCME, they said, okay, you can't compel people to pay union dues because it's political speech. You are forcing people to give money to you, a union, and you, the unions, are entirely a political entity. And this comes from years of court cases, mainly litigated by our friends at National Right to Work. And they basically built up to this point. And it's not, that is the start of the end, like I said. Now the next steps, you have to tell every public employee in America that these rights exist. And you have to double down, actually, on the litigation. One of the cases that we're working on, one of the cases that National Right to Work is working on as well, is the idea of exclusive representation. We have to make it in America so that these unions have to compete with other unions or associations. So if you're a public employee in the state of Oregon today, you pay union dues, you are forced to be represented by a union. You don't have to pay dues, but they represent you in grievance and disputes of your employer. They represent you in contract negotiations. We want to make it so these public employees no longer have to do that. If they want to negotiate their own contract, they're free to do so. If they want to join a competing union, they should be free to do so. So there's still a ways to go, but it's like I said earlier, the union's best days are over.
That's interesting. So it's like it's a case that could result potentially in a free market for being able to negotiate on contracts, and that would start to put pressure on that 50% that goes to politics and the 7.5% that goes to representation. Somebody who can give you a better deal by giving you more representation might attract people away from the union that doesn't want to bother doing that. And then, of course, as you said, you can negotiate on your own behalf. That's really interesting. Do you think that when it comes to schools, because it seems like there's a relationship between the results we get from schools in the public school system and what we see from union representation, people are really, they woke up, many parents woke up to what's been happening with schools and with their kids during COVID, because they had to be at home and they were like, what is that? What are you studying?
Yeah.
Some of them not studying, and no one did anything about it. What do you think this impact could be on something as important as education?
So the teachers' unions overplayed their hands during COVID. I mean, they showed parents what their agenda was, and parents didn't like it. So what we're starting to see now is we're starting to see parents vote, specifically at school board level, which we haven't seen before, and they're not voting for the union candidates. That's a positive trend. Even the city of San Francisco recalled their liberal school board to replace them with not conservatives, but people that weren't union lackeys. We're also seeing parents and starting to see students eject from the public school system. They're going to charter schools where they can. They're doing homeschooling. I've seen learning pods crop up during COVID. That's a positive trend as well. Parents taking back their kids' education. Lastly, we've seen teachers opt out of their unions in droves. More teachers have left the unions the past 3 years than ever before. This mass exodus has led to hundreds of millions of dollars going back into the pockets of teachers and out of the teachers' unions' political agenda. And you mentioned the correlation between teachers' unions and failing schools. Here's the trend that we've observed. Liberal cities have more spending per capita, per student, than in conservative areas. I'll use the city of Philadelphia, for example. They have about, I think it's $28,000 being spent per pupil per year. It's one of the highest in the country.
Wow.
Outcomes are significantly lower than the average. The missing component to this is the unions. They're in the middle of all this. They're the ones negotiating for higher taxes. They're the ones making sure that more money is going to the schools, but not to the teachers, not to the areas where it's needed most. Because if you fix public schools in America as a union, you'll have no reason to ask for more taxpayer dollars. So when you drive past your school in Portland or Salem or Eugene or wherever it may be, and you see that the roof's falling off or the windows are cracked or whatever it may be, it's not because the schools don't have enough money. It's because the money isn't going to the schools.
They're not going to a higher quality education, which if they solve that problem, they wouldn't have the grievance anymore. And I noticed you mentioned that from the UK, that as one of the features is that these entities that just thrive off of grievance and go around and essentially grift all the time in order to get people to either adhere to them politically or give them resources, greater resources. That's something we're familiar with here. Now, you talked about, so the last three chapters, you say the future's wide open, and you talk about heroes and villains. What will people learn from your book when you talk about heroes and villains, for example?
The heroes you mentioned earlier, it's Ronald Reagan, it's Scott Walker and his fight with the unions in Wisconsin. We're also starting to see more heroes crop up. I don't reference this in the book, but we've seen governors in conservative states start to combat government unions as well. Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders is a good friend of mine in Arkansas, and she passed a bill last legislative session that made it illegal for the government to take union dues from public employee paychecks. That's a huge win.
Wow.
Ron DeSantis then followed suit, did the same thing in Florida. We helped on that. And then in Tennessee and Kentucky, they did the exact same thing. We weren't even involved in those bills. They did it as well. So we're targeting other states. It's with what the teachers unions did, there's more of a political appetite to go after the teachers unions. So watch this space. We've got our target set on 6 more states in the next 2 years. And we believe that these governors are also going to want to get this type of stuff done. Villains, Randy Weingarten, the head of the American Federation of Teachers. You should Google, your audience should Google Becky Pringle, NEA speech. And she's the head of the National Education Association. You watch her speak, it's demonic. Completely demonic what she's out there preaching. One last point, Kevin, you mentioned it. The incentive structure for these teachers unions is to continue failing education so they can cry for more money. And one would argue in the nonprofit space that I'm in, don't you have the same incentive structure? Aren't you incentivized to go and make sure that unions are big and bad so that you can ask more people for money to go and defund them? Well, I tell people that my job is to work myself out of a job. I'll use a better analogy. If you run a nonprofit to end homelessness in Portland, and you end homelessness in Portland, you're out of a job. I hope during my career that I can shut down the Freedom Foundation because we've taken the union's influence out of politics. That's my goal in my career.
That's fantastic, because that's exactly what a guy I know named Kevin Dahlgren is saying about homelessness. He's a friend of mine, and he said the exact same thing, because he noticed that people were not actually trying to end it. They were literally enabling it and promoting it, along with the drug use that seems to be related to it. It's funny how these issues run on parallel tracks, and they kind of rhyme with each other the way they function. So that's how serious this is. And thank you for writing this book. I have posted, and I'll post it again here. Folks want to get your book either in hardcover, paperback, or in the case of Amazon Kindle. I've just posted the link to that, as well as pretty much any place else that they could purchase books. And I posted a video where you talk about what the book is about in some more detail. There's also some events coming up, and I think we wanted to mention that before we wrap up here today. You have annual dinners. I attended the one last year in 2022, and you have one that's coming up here for 2023 here in Oregon. That's going to feature former Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that, and I'll post the link to that.
Yeah, so each year in the Northwest. Northwest is our home base. It's where we have one office in Salem, an office in Olympia, Washington. Most of our employees are in the Northwest. So we do these annual events for our supporters, and I encourage all the people listening to this to buy tickets at freedomfoundation.com. And there's an event drop page that you can buy tickets there at. Saturday, September 23rd is our Washington event. That's happening in Renton, Washington, and that features Jesse Waters from Fox News. And then October 14th in Hillsboro, Oregon, features Tulsi Gabbard. And it's basically an opportunity to get together with like-minded folks, hear from a good speaker, get an update from the Freedom Foundation and wins that we're having, and celebrate with people. In the Northwest, I lived there for a long time. It's very easy to become down about the future and that type of stuff. Our events are all positive, and they have good results. So I'd encourage all of your listeners and viewers to go and sign up.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. We need that win in our sails and that reminder that we can actually fight and succeed. And I was just totally blown away when I heard the 40% reduction in money going to the unions, and 40% of anything being accomplished by an organization is an enormous result, and you guys deserve enormous credit for doing that. So just to wrap up here, what should folks stay tuned for? You've mentioned a few things. So there's some court cases. There's, of course, the activity on the ground here in Oregon. They can donate at freedomfoundation.com. What else? What would you like to share as we wrap up here, just so that folks know what's coming and what's in the future for Aaron With and the Freedom Foundation?
Well, for the future of the Freedom Foundation, we're going to continue to hammer these unions. And like I said, my goal inevitably is to put the power back in the hands of people and out of these politicians. And we're seeing that every day. So our campaigns are going to get bigger, bolder in the Northwest and beyond. We now do outreach in all 50 states, and we're going to continue to do that as well. Litigation-wise, hopefully the U.S. Supreme Court is going to take one of our cases in the next couple of years, and we're going to have another national setting case. We're also doing a lot of legislative work in red states, in states that will go out and pass legislation favorable to us. And then the last thing I'll say is we're doing a lot of decertification work now as well. This is a really nuanced issue, but to give you just the basics of it, a lot of unions in Oregon and throughout the country, they're associated with these big national union conglomerates. So what we're trying to do is create local associations, and we're attempting to have votes locally amongst union members to get rid of the national union and replace them with our association. So if you stay tuned to Freedom Foundation's emails and sign up at freedomfoundation.com, we'll have a big announcement of one of the largest school districts in America that we are targeting for a decertification vote. It would be, if successful, it would be the biggest decertification in American history. So keep your eyes peeled for that.
It's kind of like the concept of government, right? That's closer to you, that you control, instead of some faraway corporate or national entity that doesn't care about you, that you can hold them accountable and make sure they represent you. That's fantastic. Well, thank you for sharing that. Thank you again for being here tonight. This has been an incredible way to commemorate and celebrate Labor Day, which is freedom. And again, everybody take a look at Aaron's book. It's over here on the left-hand side. Freedom is the Foundation. You can find it on Amazon and other places that you can purchase books. And please go to freedomfoundation.com take a look, sign up for their email newsletter, and do consider donating, because that's what powers this effort. Thank you so much, Aaron, for joining us here tonight. Good luck with everything, and we'll look forward to hearing more of the story of the Freedom Foundation, and as well your pursuits in the future. Thank you so much,
Kevin. Appreciate you being in this fight. Thank you for all you do.
And everybody, please share the show with everyone you can. I put in the comments a link to opt out today, which you can get to from the Freedom Foundation website. If you have friends, neighbors, relatives elsewhere in the country, everyone can have freedom if they click on that and escape the public employee unions. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night. We'll be back tomorrow night with another episode of The Captive Audience with Sunny Danforth and Don. And we will see you then. Have a great night.